I love the sounds of the morning, don't you? Especially here in our little town of Silver Creek. Not many towns left like Silver Creek. Why, the trees along the sidewalks are so green and full that sometimes you can hardly see how blue the sky is overhead. Every house along Main Street has a perfect blanket of green grass stretching out to the mailboxes. And, of course, in the spring, these houses always have a fresh coat of paint. Well, most of them do. There is one house. Folks around here say it's haunted. Well, I don't know about that, but it sure looks it. Broken windows and weeds waist high, and it hasn't been painted in years. But I'm getting ahead of myself. For heaven's sakes, I haven't even told you my name. I'm Mary, Dr. Chapman's housekeeper. And right now, I'm fixing breakfast for his 2 children, Paul and Cindy. Well, I've taken care of them for years, but since their mother passed away a while back, they especially need me now. Excuse me while I get Benji's breakfast. Well, wait a minute. I didn't tell you about Benji, did I? Well, around here, everyone loves Benji just like he was a member of the family, especially Paul and Cindy. And for good reason. Why, they shared the biggest adventure anyone has ever had in Silver Creek. It all started last summer. In fact, it was on a morning just about like this. Morning, Benji. Come on in. You're late this morning. You almost missed the kids. Here's your breakfast.
Is Benji here yet?
Yes, Benji's here yet.
Cindy, he's here.
Well, he won't be for long if you don't stop that yelling. You know what happens if your father walks in.
I don't think Daddy understands about us and Benji.
That was an understatement. Dr. Chapman had no use for stray animals of any kind, and despite all our arguments, that included Benji.
Where's Benji?
Don't yell in the kitchen. Do you want your father in here?
Nobody's coming anyway. We've got to hide Benji.
Oh, phenomenal.
Quick, he's right behind me.
Here, give him to me. Bring him over here. We'll put him in my lap. Come on. I pushed my chair as close to the kitchen table as possible and covered Benji with the tablecloth. And stay balanced. It could mean your neck.
Paul, Cindy, it's time to go.
Oh, boy. I was balancing Benji with one hand, holding his bowl with the other, and Dr. Chapman was walking through the kitchen door.
Okay, what's going on?
You heard your father, children. It's time to go.
Now, come on, gang. I know you're hiding something, so let's have it. Starting with whatever you've got under the table, Mary.
Yes, Doctor.
What's that?
It's a bowl.
I can see that, Mary. What was in it?
A snack.
Mary, how are we ever going to get them to eat a decent breakfast if they know they can come in here afterward and get something they like better?
You're right. Absolutely right. No snacks. I'm sorry, kids. No snacks after breakfast. And that's final.
I guess we'll just have to grin and bear it.
Phew. That was close. Too close. From now on, Benji will have to have his breakfast outside. Oh, gonna eat and run, huh? Have a good day.
Stop it! Stop it!
That's Mrs. Finster. She lives across the street. She's famous for 2 things, her prize-winning roses and her beautiful white cat.
You leave my sweetie Petey alone! Oh, you primitive, uncultured cur!
Sweetie Petey ran for the nearest tree as Benji continued barking. She was terribly stuck up, even for a cat. As for Mrs. Finster, Benji knew she was quite harmless. All bark and no bite, so to speak.
I'm going to tell her to go for you one day. And she'll do something dreadful. Then you'll be sorry. You have no decency. He was late today.
Hey, Butch. Come here, boy.
That's Benji's friend, Officer Tuttle. They meet in the park about this time each morning. It's a funny thing. Some stray dogs might try to avoid a policeman, but not Benji. He always stops for red lights. He looks both ways before crossing the street, and he never chases cars. So why shouldn't he be friends with the policeman?
Hey, guess what? Nancy and I set the date. In 2 months, I'm going to be a married man. Yeah, well, your day will come. some cute little Pekingese will come along and sweep you right off your feet. Climb on up here, let me tell you all about it. Suit yourself. See you tomorrow, then. Just remember when she gets you, I tried to give you a little advice.
That's Bill. He owns the cafe on the square. He's worked there as long as anyone can remember. Well, sometimes he works.
Oh, hello, Sam. Hey, where you been? You let me sleep too long. I ought to be in there getting ready for the rush. Today's a homemade stew special. You know how long that takes? Well, I better get a move on. I'll get your pay. It's just inside here.
Benji's pay was always the same. A big, juicy, leftover bone.
There you go. Here's your bone. You're welcome. And be on time tomorrow, you hear? It's meatloaf day.
Clasping the bone tightly, Benji trotted on through town, across the park, stopping briefly to investigate the contents of his favorite litter basket, and then headed toward home. Home for Benji was a big, deserted mansion. You know, the one I told you about earlier? The one some folks say is haunted? The front porch had long since fallen in, and the doors had been boarded up for years. But that didn't bother Benji. He never used the door anyway. He just stair-stepped up the weather-beaten arbor to the back porch roof, jumped over a low railing, and squeezed through a broken window pane on the second floor. The inside of the house really did look haunted. Dust and cobwebs covered all the furniture, and the wind seemed to make the whole house creak with age. At least everyone hoped it was the wind. The stairway was dark and shadowy as Benji made his way down the steps and over to his room under a drape-covered table in the hall. Of course, to Benji, his house wasn't scary at all. It was warm and spacious and quiet, and he was never disturbed by visitors. At least he never had been before today.
Well, go on in. It was your idea. You go first.
Oh, for pity's sakes, I'll go first. Let's just get inside before somebody sees us.
Benji watched quietly as two men and a girl walked right into the hallway and looked around. One of the men put a big paper sack on the floor right next to Benji's table. But Benji didn't move.
This place is great.
It's perfect. I think Mitch will like it a lot.
I don't know, Linda Sue.
One of the men walked over to the sack and pulled out a small tin can. Benji watched carefully as he pulled the tab that opened the top. It wasn't dog food. Benji was sure of that. It smelled too good. His mouth watered a little as the man took a bite.
Well, I think Mitch will like it, and he'll make the final decision. I'm glad you thought of it, Henry. Come on, let's go.
All right. Just for the record, I ain't glad you thought of it, Henry. This place gives me the screaming creeps.
Benji waited for the door to slam. He wasn't sure he liked these uninvited guests. After all, Benji wasn't used to having visitors in his house. Still, they hadn't stayed long, and they had brought some groceries. Benji's nose led him straight to the half-eaten pudding cup. Banana. Delicious. Not only delicious, it was downright habit-forming. Benji picked it up and carried it to his room under the table. Once inside, he proceeded to spend a very contented afternoon licking the sides of a pudding cup. Next morning, I let Paul and Cindy give Benji his breakfast, but this time on the back porch. We weren't taking any chances.
Okay, kids, you better get on up front before your father comes back here looking for you.
Well, what is this?
What do you think?
Oh, you brushed him out, sure.
We didn't have time to finish my side. Does it make him not look like a stray?
Well, I never really... Oh, now I see. This is for your father's benefit, isn't it?
We figured if we made him look real nice, then Daddy would like him. We even bought a real dog brush with our allowance.
Kids, I'm afraid the problem is a bit more complicated than just making him look nice.
It'll help, won't it?
Now, Cindy, I never
We
said...
have to be right, because you're on our side. And you always say right wins over wrong.
Oh, boy. As you can see, I had my problems. But Benji's day proceeded as usual. After his regular encounter with Mrs. Finster and Sweetie Petey, he headed for the park.
Well, I can tell you've given some thought to our little talk yesterday. Got yourself all dolly-doed up and slicked down. Oh, don't tell me. I know when a guy's out looking.
Benji had no idea what Officer Tuttle was talking about. To tell the truth, Benji never was much of a ladies' man. And besides, who had time for girls anyway? He knew his friend Bill would have one of yesterday's bones waiting for him at the cafe. So much for girls. He'd take a bone any day of the week. On his way back from Bill's cafe, Benji took his usual mid-morning stroll through the park. What a beautiful day. Not a cloud in the sky. Certainly a nice day to be... Benji stopped in his tracks and stared straight ahead. There, at the bottom of a hill, by his favorite litter basket, was a small white dog. A small white girl dog. A beautiful girl dog. Oh, her hair wasn't combed and she was kind of muddy, but just the same, Benji could tell she had a lot of class. Not at all like the other girl dogs in town. Benji dropped the bone and began walking down the hill. Now he could see that the other dog was circling the litter basket, hoping to find something to eat, and obviously much too engrossed in her search to give Benji any of her attention. Benji made his move. He never was the subtle type. Maybe the little girl dog thought Benji was going to steal her few scraps of food, but for whatever reason, she gave an unfriendly bark and continued her search. Benji tried again. Still no response. This was enough to shake a man's confidence. Benji rolled over and over in the grass playfully, then looked up at the girl. She wasn't even watching, just poking around in the same old litter basket looking for something to eat. Wait a minute. Something to eat, of course. Benji ran back to the top of the hill, picked up the bone, and carried it back down to the little girl. She turned and looked at the bone and then at Benji. She was sure he didn't mean the bone for her. No one would give up a big, juicy bone like that. Benji pushed it closer until he and the little girl were standing nose to nose, separated only by the biggest bone the little girl had ever seen. She lowered her head and sniffed it cautiously. It sure smelled better than anything she'd found in the litter basket. Slowly, she began to lick the bone. And then, without any warning, she leaned forward and licked Benji right on the nose. Benji was so flustered he didn't know what to do. He jumped up and started prancing happily away. Just where he was going, he wasn't sure. Then all at once he stopped. Benji realized that it had suddenly become very important to know whether or not this beautiful little white dog was following him. So important, in fact, that Benji almost hated to look behind him. Slowly, Benji turned and looked down the hill. She was following. Benji wasted no time in introducing his new friend around town. Of course, he knew from experience where he could get her a good meal.
Benji, is that you?
What in the world are you doing here at this time of day? Oh, well, what do we have here? Well, Benji, I'd say you've got a mighty highfalutin-looking girlfriend. You're not over your head, are you? Dumb question. Well, if you're going to be a regular, we're going to have to think of something to call you, but I don't know what it'll be. Now, he was easy. He looks like a Benji. But you look like Park Avenue, and I'm just not up on high-class names. The closest I ever came to Park Avenue was when George used to tell me that someday he was going to make enough money to take me to Tiffany's and buy me anything I wanted. Say, we could call you Tiffany. To me, that's about as high class as you can get. Then Tiffany it is. I watched as Benji and Tiffany romped happily off, not even remembering to take along the big juicy bone that had brought them together. I had never seen Benji so happy. He and Tiffany ran and ran until they both fell exhausted in the tall green grass. Often they would share a drink of cool water from the old bird bath in the park, or chase brightly colored butterflies as they ran through a field. And if indeed Benji was just a floppy-eared stray dog, in Tiffany's eyes, he was a champion. I wish everyone in Silver Creek could have been as happy as Benji and Tiffany were that spring. But not everyone was. Especially not Paul and Cindy.
But, Daddy, why?
That's just the way it has to be, son. We don't know what he gets into, what germs he's carrying around, or really anything about him. He could be picking up diseases all over town and bringing them here.
But, Daddy, he's not. We know.
Honey, you never know. You can't see a disease. Believe me, I've been there, and it's just not worth the risk to the family. I'll get you any kind of dog you want, and we'll build a fence around the back.
We don't want any kind of dog. We want Benji. Why can't we build a fence for Benji?
Mary and I talked about that, and...
Honey, Benji is a very special kind of dog. He's been on his own a long time now. I think he'd be very, very unhappy if you penned him up. That's the hardest part about love sometimes, doing what you know is right for the one you love, even though it hurts you a whole lot. Now, that's what your father is trying to do for you, and that's what you should do for Benji, if you love him. The kids did try to understand. They really did. But when you feel love for someone, even a little stray dog like Benji, goodbye can be an awfully hard word to say. Paul and Cindy tried to explain to Benji why he had to leave, but of course, he didn't understand. He just walked over to where Cindy was sitting and licked a big tear from her face. And you know something? The kids weren't the only ones that were going to miss that little pup. He was quite a dog. Quite a dog, that Benji. After Paul and Cindy left for school, Tiffany joined Benji for his morning rounds, then followed him through the park and on to his house. From his vantage point high on the roof, Benji watched anxiously as little Tiffany struggled to follow. It wasn't an easy climb for a little dog like Tiffany, but with some coaxing from Benji, she made it just fine.
Hey, wait a minute. Come here, Henry. Look at this.
Benji and Tiffany stopped at the top of the stairs. Visitors again. This could easily become a nuisance.
That sack wasn't tumped over like that yesterday.
Oh, come on, Riley, knock it off.
Well, you can walk away calmly saying knock it off if you want to, but where's your pudding cup?
My what?
Didn't you leave a pudding cup sitting on this chair?
I don't know. Maybe we've got trained pudding cups. How should I know? Now, don't bug me. Just right.
Benji and Tiffany watched as the tall, skinny man sat down at a desk. He had a whole stack of funny-looking purple paper with raggedy edges. He picked up the top sheet and started writing, while the other man looked over his shoulder.
Well, it's working.
What do you mean?
Doing it left-handed so they can't identify the handwriting. They can't even read it, so how could they identify it?
Benji saw the man grab the piece of paper, wad it up, and throw it on the floor behind him. It landed at the foot of the stairs, right in front of Benji.
Oh, I'm sorry, Henry. I don't like this place. I don't even think I like this deal, and I'm just nervous, that's all.
Well, we don't have time to be nervous. Get out of the way.
The other man sat down, took another sheet of purple paper, and began writing.
Here's the note. Now get going.
Benji ducked out of sight as the two men walked toward the door. Benji heard the door slam, then watched as the man called Henry walked back through the hall, right by the stairs, and into another room. Benji hesitated a minute, then decided it was safe. And Tiffany followed him as he eased down the stairs and across the hall, pausing just a moment to sniff the crumpled piece of paper on the floor. He'd never smelled paper like this before. It smelled sweet, like Mrs. Finster's roses.
All right, get inside.
Mitch, this isn't the way we planned it.
Like a flash, Benji and Tiffany were side by side under the table.
Shut up and stop your squirming, or somebody's going to get hurt.
Benji lurched forward. He couldn't believe his eyes. There, not 10 feet away, stood Paul and Cindy. Their hands were tied behind them and handkerchiefs covered their mouths, and Benji could see tears on Cindy's face.
You don't have to shove them around.
What are they doing here?
I don't know, Henry. I promise I don't know. It's Mitch.
Well, Mitch better get to explaining fast, or Mitch will have this whole thing in his lap. They're supposed to be out in the country looking at a horse. I bargained for a simple con job, not kidnapping.
Well, you've got kidnapping. All of you. Now get these kids in there, like I said.
Look, I don't like this setup a bit. Deal me out, Mitch. I'm leaving.
Not so, Henry. Come on back.
No chance.
Hold it, Henry. I'll shoot.
Benji saw the flash of cold steel in Mitch's hand. Once, years before, on a dark, deserted street, Benji had seen a man raise a gun like that. He remembered the scream and the loud explosion. Now he knew that Paul and Cindy were in serious trouble.
Okay, get in the other room.
Benji watched the two men walk into the next room. He followed them very slowly. Somewhere he could hear Cindy crying softly. He knew that she and Paul needed more help than he could possibly offer. He walked back to the table and gave Tiffany a reassuring nudge. Then, more like a cat than a dog, Benji was up the stairway, out the window, and onto the roof. No one saw him go. Benji scratched frantically at our back door. Almost exhausted from his crosstown run, he waited for someone to come to the door. But no one did. He tried barking. Someone must hear him. Still no answer. Benji was desperate. He managed to work the edge of the screen door with his paw until he was just able to get his nose inside. And quickly he pushed his way into the kitchen. No one. Cautiously, he made his way into the hall. Benji knew he wasn't supposed to be here, but he also knew that Paul and Cindy were in danger. Besides, he was sure he could make us understand, somehow. He stood at the entrance to the living room and looked around the corner. The room was full of strangers. Benji caught a glimpse of Dr. Chapman and me across the room. He darted toward us. Suddenly he stopped short. His nose twitched, and he turned toward a beautiful antique coffee table. His nose twitched again. Mrs. Finster's roses. There, on the table, was a purple sheet of paper, just like the one the man had thrown on the floor of Benji's house. He worked his way to the table and sniffed the paper. Yes, it smelled just like Mrs. Finster's roses.
Benji! What are you doing in here? I'm sorry, Doctor. He's never been past the kitchen before. Bad dog. Shame on you. Now you run along. Go.
Benji struggled to regain his footing after being carelessly dumped onto the back steps.
No, I don't have time to mess with you. Now go on.
Benji didn't fancy a spanking, but he was determined to get help. He opened the screen door, crossed the kitchen, and made his way very cautiously down the long hallway, halting at the slightest sound. His heart pounding, Benji stopped at the entrance to the living room and looked around the corner. There were even more people this time. Benji wanted to help, but how? He just lay there on the floor, wondering what to do. Benji watched as a man walked over to the coffee table and picked up the purple piece of paper.
This is the ransom note. There weren't any fingerprints, and we haven't heard anything from handwriting yet.
Benji's eyes never left the paper as it was passed from person to
received a call
person.
from school last
Apparently, everyone wanted to see it.
I found the note pinned to the sun visor of my car.
Finally, one of the men tossed it back on the coffee table. Benji stared at the paper that seemed to be so important. Then, quite suddenly, he darted to the table, grabbed the note in his mouth, and took off down the hall. Benji scampered down the hall. It was just as he had hoped. Everyone was following him. They did understand. Now all he had to do was lead them to Paul and Cindy. He bounded out the kitchen door, down the steps, into the yard, and headed for the street.
Gotcha. You realize how much trouble you could have caused us if you'd have gotten away with this?
The policeman took the note from Benji. He couldn't believe it. Everyone was walking back to the house. Benji ran after us.
Take it like that.
What's wrong with you? You act like you've gone crazy. I don't like to be mean to you, Benji, but I'm going to have to if you cause any more problems. Now go on home. Or wherever you go.
Benji was broken-hearted as he slowly walked across the lawn and began making his way down the deserted street. He had never felt so alone. He stopped at Bill's Cafe, even though he knew it would be closed. Benji pushed his wet nose against the glass door. No one. Even the park was deserted. Benji knew Officer Tuttle could help Paul and Cindy. If only he was here. If only. Benji climbed up on the park bench and tried to relax, but something deep inside just wouldn't let him. In the distance, he heard footsteps. Benji turned to look. It was just too good to be true. There, walking toward the big brick building on the other side of the park, was Officer Tuttle. Benji was running even before his feet hit the ground. Tuttle was too far away to hear. As Benji raced toward the building, he watched Tuttle walk up the steps, pull open the big wooden door, and disappear into the building. Benji ran frantically toward the huge wooden door that was closing much too quickly. He took the step with one great leap and squeezed through the door at the very last instant. Benji stood looking down the longest hall he'd ever seen. There was no time to catch his breath. He had to find Tuttle. He sprang forward and suddenly found himself lying flat on the slick, highly polished floor, his legs completely out of control. He struggled to his feet and half ran, half slid toward the other end of the hall. No sign of Tuttle. He checked the rooms along the hallway. Nothing. Suddenly, he heard the echo of footsteps. Benji darted back in the hall just in time to see Tuttle and another man walking out the door. He sprinted toward them, trying hard to keep his balance. And without ever breaking stride, Benji hurled himself against the door. But not in time. Benji barked desperately. But it was no use. The walls were too thick. No one would hear. No one. Benji turned and walked dejectedly back down the hall, his head almost touching the floor. In front of him towered the biggest window he'd ever seen. He pressed his nose against the cold glass and looked out into the park. The many trees threw their long shadows across the freshly watered lawn. It was too late. Benji had barked and run and pleaded for help, but he had failed, and now it was too late. He collapsed onto the floor. Never lifting his head from the cold stone floor, Benji's eyes wandered about the room. It was empty, terribly empty. The setting sun hit the corner of something on the floor. Just an old crumpled piece of paper. A crumpled piece of paper. Benji jumped up and started running with all the determination he could muster. He'd make someone hear him if it took the rest of the night. He scratched frantically at the big glass door. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw something move. It was a man, the janitor. Benji had seen him lots of times. The man turned and walked along the sidewalk which surrounded the building, but Benji just wouldn't give up. He scrambled from room to room, pounding the windows and barking. The man turned and looked toward the window. Benji's heart stood still. Did the man see him? The janitor was walking toward the door. He did see Benji. Benji's feet hardly touched the ground as he ran toward home. Benji leaped through the window and down to the landing. It was still there. The crumpled up sheet of purple paper was on the floor right next to Cindy.
Will you sit those kids down? That pacing back and forth's about to drive me crazy.
Slowly, Benji eased down the stairs toward the paper.
I put you right square in the middle of a sure $100,000 split, and all I hear is moaning because you're involved. I'm sick of it.
Benji stopped on the bottom step, scarcely daring to breathe, but never taking his eyes off the paper.
Hey, what's that?
It's a dog.
It's the kid's dog. How'd he find us?
Look, he's got the ransom note.
What do you mean he's got the ransom note? How could he have the ransom note?
It was a sloppy try. It was the first one. I threw it away.
Benji held the note as tightly as he could and slowly backed toward the wall.
Come here, dog. Give me a nice doggy.
Three grown men hovered around him, separating him from the stairway.
Come on, doggy. Come on. Nice doggy. Nice doggy.
Benji made a dash for the stairway.
Gotcha.
Mitch pulled at the note, but Benji held on tightly.
Oh, what the... Oh, let go of my leg.
It was Tiffany. She had leaped from under the table and was tearing into Mitch's ankle. Benji hit the floor with a thud and in a blink was dashing up the stairs with the note clenched tightly between his teeth.
You little mutt. It'll be a cold day before you ever bite anyone again.
Benji paused on the landing and looked down just in time to see Mitch's foot swing toward Tiffany. Benji stood for a long, fearful moment, waiting for Tiffany to get up. But she didn't.
Well, don't just stand there. Get that other dog.
The two men clambered up the stairs toward Benji, but he couldn't move. His eyes were fixed on Tiffany. The men were getting closer. Benji glanced at them, then back at Tiffany.
There he is.
As the two men threw themselves at Benji, he spun around and dashed up the stairs and out the window.
He jumped down, right out there. Come on, let's get downstairs.
But there was no stopping Benji. Not this time. He ran and ran and ran, ignoring street lights and stop signs, narrowly missing a speeding car. Benji knew this was no time to think of his own safety. He was sure he had never run this fast before. The wind whistled in Benji's ears, and the houses and trees in front of him were just a blur of color seen through his tear-filled eyes. But the tears were not for himself. They were for his friends. Tiffany. He could still hear her cry as Mitch kicked her. He remembered the way she just lay there, so helpless, so alone. Suddenly, Benji knew how very much he cared for Tiffany. He wondered if they would ever again spend a summer afternoon playing in the park or chasing butterflies in the field. And Paul and Cindy, they were the best friends Benji had. It was Paul and Cindy who always found time to play with him, feed him, even brush the stickers from his coat. He could still see Cindy, tears in her eyes, so very frightened, and Paul trying so hard not to be afraid, trying so hard to be a man. Thoughts raced through his mind. The gun in Mitch's hand. Tiffany. Paul. Cindy. Then, almost before he realized it, Benji was in our backyard running up to the door. This time he didn't even bother to bark or scratch. He nosed open the door, ran across the kitchen, bolted through the swinging door, and raced down the hallway into the living room.
Oh, look. Isn't he cute?
The voice startled Benji. It was Linda, Mitch's girlfriend. What was she doing there? As she started toward him, Benji backed away, holding the note tighter than ever.
Mary, please get that dog out of here.
Benji, come here. Let me see what you've got there.
Linda grabbed the paper and tore it from Benji's mouth. Benji snapped at her.
Benji, what is the matter with you? Stop that this minute. Do you hear me?
Somebody's old grocery list.
Benji, hush.
Well, I have to be going.
Benji watched as Linda stuck the note in her purse.
I'll show you to the door.
Thank you for coming, Linda Sue, and I'm sorry about this dog.
Don't worry about it.
Benji kept looking, never taking his eyes from the purse. This was his last chance. He had to get away and get to that purse, and there was only one way to do it.
Mary, what's the matter?
He bit me!
Hold it.
Benji grabbed the purse, jerking it to the floor and scattering its contents all over the hall. He grabbed the piece of paper, ran toward me, and leaped into my arms.
Come back here, dog! Give that to me! What is wrong with you?
Benji seemed to shove the crumpled old grocery list into my hand, and I... But wait a minute. This was no grocery list.
Dr. Chapman?
No!
Lieutenant Samuels?
No, please! No!
It's another ransom note. Are you sure you got the original?
Right here. Linda Sue, where are Paul and Cindy?
I don't know.
But there was someone in the room who did know. At last we understood. Benji darted out the back door. It had worked. Everyone was following him. He took off across the street, through town, past Bill's Cafe, down the alley, across the park, past house after house. It was getting dark, so Benji turned to make sure we were following. Everyone was out of breath, but we were trying to keep up. Benji ran on into the night.
It didn't work, Mitch. She's not coming. We got to get out of here and get to a safer place. Now.
Sit down. We stay.
Forget it. We're going now. You either use your gun or come with us.
All right. We'll go. Pack up the kids.
Hurry up! Stop some of this.
Where's this stuff going? Don't let him get away.
Okay, get the kids out on the porch. Make sure the coast is clear.
It's all clear. Let's go.
Don't move a muscle. Now let them down, nice and easy.
Benji watched as Lieutenant Samuels took the gun from Mitch.
Are you kids okay?
Mm-hmm.
Did he hurt you? Well, we'll take care of them where they won't bother you again.
Cindy, Paul!
Are you all right?
Suddenly, everyone was hugging everyone else, even Benji. Or should I say, especially Benji. But Benji had someone else on his mind. Benji sat by the door of Dr. Chapman's office for what seemed like hours. Finally, the door opened slightly and a tiny white dog hobbled out wearing a small white cast on one leg.
You should have seen her, Daddy. She was really brave. So was Benji.
We owe them both a lot. There's no doubt about that.
Benji never took his eyes from Tiffany as we walked along the moonlit street toward home.
Would you say they're kind of like heroes?
I'd say they were definitely heroes.
Well, if we owe them a lot and they're heroes, it wouldn't be right to send them out in the streets, would it?
I don't know, Mary. You ever seen any heroes that got turned out into the streets?
Not too many.
Then can they go home with us? Please, Daddy, just till Tiffany gets well.
Oh, I'm afraid we might get too attached to them by then, so maybe we should just plan on them staying with us for good. Unless they get tired of us.
Come on, we're going home. Do we have to build any fences?
No fences.
I have a feeling Benji will be sticking pretty close to home now, at least until Tiffany can travel better.
By then we can love him so much, he'll want to stay.
I don't know anyone more qualified to do that than you two.
Paul and Cindy did love Benji, now more than ever. So did I. And believe it or not, so did Dr. Chapman. In fact, sometimes I think he loves Benji most of all. That's just the way love is, I guess.
I feel love all around. I can feel it shining down. It lights up the day like the morning sun, reaching out and touching everyone. I feel love all day long, like a promise, like a song, and it's feeling good, like I knew it would. Everywhere I go, I feel love. I feel love. I feel love. Yes, I do. Yes, I do. I can feel it. Feeling love. So can you. So can you. It's a rainbow washing rainy skies away, bringing back another sunny day. I feel love everywhere. It's like magic in the air. Yeah, it's me loving you, loving everyone, everywhere I go. I feel love. Love the answer, love the only way. Sunshine gonna come and go, but love is here to stay. I feel love all day long, like a promise, like a song.